Yeah, it says it's live.
Oh, is it live?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Streaming live. So we have here today Lori, Beth, and myself. And I'm really excited about talking about this topic. We're going to talk about inner child healing trap. So just first, short introductions about myself and Lori. I'm a psychotherapist doing therapy right now, and Lori has been a psychotherapist for 13 years, so knows a lot about therapy and also transitioning into being a psycho-spiritual mentor for women, right, Lori? And helping women transforming trauma into, move on from trauma to fully living, right? Not getting stuck in trauma. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And I also, from my personal experience, I saw this this post that Lori made about inner child healing trap, and I was struck by it because I think it's a topic that is not really talked about much in clinical circles, in healing circles. We talk about the importance of inner child healing. So we talk about, okay, it's important to contact your inner child, important to heal her or him, but we don't talk about that, okay, we can get stuck there. And that's, to me, it's very interesting because if you've done a lot of healing like I have done, or you have done, you know that you can get stuck in perpetual healing and never move on to, you can even use it probably as excuse subconsciously. So we're going to talk about all these traps on your way to healing your full life. And because I find it super interesting and super helpful for myself to kind of, how do I move on from wounded inner child into this functional adult self who's working on the project, who's active in the world, you know, kind of who's a professional, who has a expertise, and not just this wounded girl that's taking so much space. And she's important too, but you know, how much space can we give it to her? So, Lori, let's, where you want to start? I mean, talked a little bit with you before this, but what feels good right now as far as start?
Well, first of all, I'll just say hi, everyone.
Yes.
For those who don't know me, on Iryna's page, and like she said, I'm a psychotherapist and also a psycho-spiritual mentor for women. And one of the things that I'm most inspired about is helping women stop being a self-improvement project. And so I think that this topic is so relevant to that, right? Because like you said so beautifully, how do we, like, what are some of the traps that we can get into that kind of would keep us in this feeling like we're just constantly healing, but we're not actually living, right? Like you use such great examples. I love all those examples of like being an adult who's, in my view, it's also at the fundamental, it's just like enjoying life, right? And being creative and being spontaneous and doing the things that you love, and not feeling like you're just constantly having to heal. So anyway, to add that.
Right. So, and you mentioned that sometimes like we don't even know in what state, like sometimes, like even maybe in a healing session or in a life, we sort of get flooded, right, with this painful experience. And it's very hard to separate because you merge with this wounded child. Can you say a few words about that?
Sure. Actually, it's a great place to start, I think, because I think that one of the reasons that we all, whether we're like a therapist or a coach or some kind of practitioner and or a client, the reason that I think the usefulness of even the phrase or the concept of inner child, right? If we were to kind of talk about that, is so that you can start to separate out, oh, I'm in my adult self and I'm having a response that's not coming from the present moment, right? I'm having like in some forms of work, you know, they'll say like, I'm having an implicit somatic memory. So there's like a memory coming up, right? That can be very bodily, and especially in like pre-verbal work when we didn't even have words, right? That there might just be something that like when people, like one example could be like having like overwhelming kind of black, dark depression, right? Because, or terror, like some of these really early feelings that were not metabolized. So I think that like the usefulness of the term inner child, and then all the kinds of work that focus on that, you know, which are vast across, I mean, there's so many modalities that focus on that, that we could talk about. But I think the usefulness of that is actually to try to begin to unmerge the child from the adult self. And so I think that feels like a good place to start, because that's like so important, right? To have that language and to be like, oh, this isn't actually happening right now.
Yeah,
So
bringing them in the present moment, right? Like there's adult self lives in the present moment. The child self lives in the past. It lives in the memories, the
yeah,
experiences.
yeah,
I was
yeah.
gonna also, oh, sorry.
Well,
I was gonna,
I do think it's always an art, like as a practitioner and also as a client. I think this is, so one of the things I think is important to frame this conversation is, even though we're talking about the traps that we can get into, that we'll get into, I think that it's also, you know, we can, it's also, I just want to say for everyone, and this is how I work in a pretty customized way, and I'm imagining you do too, is how like each person is going to be different. And right, for some people, for example, their inner child might be a precocious child who actually already was acting like an adult. And so I think being able to then separate that out and say, okay, yeah, you're very highly functional, but where is that coming from? Is that coming from strategy, or is that actually coming from, you know, the true self, we could say, or, you know, the self that is, because the adult, I think, once unmerged from the child, or in the moments that we can unmerge, actually has a lot of freedom, right? And has a lot of creativity, has a lot of space, feels like, oh, you know, I can just live, and I think, yeah. So.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that like we're talking about sort of the traps and getting stuck on inner child healing, but for some people it can take a few years just to get to inner child. So
Yeah.
I just want to say that the contact with inner child is really important, and it's worth having. Like if you never done this work and you're just starting your journey, then the first step is always to make contact with your inner child, to get to know him, like you say, or her. We can say some kids, some little professors, right? We can say like those little kids that are parentified, meaning they have to grow up fast and they sort of know it all, but in truth they're children. So yeah, my point is that there may be type of clients that are hesitant to make contact with their child, and there are other types of clients like us, maybe like us, who are like, love it, you know, they like love the feeling of an inner child because it's deep and it's rich and it's emotional. And that's the danger, right? Because it's in some way it's like attractive to be in that space. Do you find that like you get like sort of sucked into?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think that is one of the things, right? Like, for example, if in my history, there's a lot of longing, or there's a lot of pain, I think there are certain types there are certain people, right, who might get kind of caught in that longing and that pain and feel like, okay, now I'm being with the child again and again, and I mean, you can talk about your experience, I think, because you may have a different experience to me, but I just have found that there are certain repetitive themes in my life and in my healing where I continue to kind of, like, I sort of keep going into it. Now, granted, sometimes I'm not aware, even after like a long period of time of doing healing, that I'm in the child. So the moment that I can kind of take a step back, then there's more spaciousness. But I have personally found that it's almost like, here's where I would say the trap is that and I see this in my clients as well, is that I'm like, oh, I need to keep healing. I need to keep healing. I need to keep healing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I've literally had experiences, and I've been doing this work for many years, where it feels like, you know what? I've healed this part of me as much as I am going to be able to heal this part of me. Now, maybe something shifts in the future, but I think that's where one of the traps is actually bringing in that quality of acceptance. I've done what I can for her. And you know what? She may always feel this way, and that's okay. And in essence, right, that is bringing in the adult and saying, yeah, you feel bad. That's okay. You know, you might always be anxious in this situation. And you know what? You're human, and that's okay. And I actually think that that's what we would do with children. I mean, it's the exact same thing. You might have a child who's chronically anxious and who maybe never fully gets over the anxiety. But as a parent, you're not sitting there continually trying to work with that child. You know, you of course you're going to bring in different ways to work with the child, but you might also just be like, at a certain point, okay, this is how my child is. How can I actually just hold my child through this and make it enough, and let them be okay with the fact that they have anxiety, and they have anxiety around this situation, you know? I think that there's a thing that happens in that acceptance. Yeah.
Right. And it's like what we talked about, that a lot of times, like with kids, if we give too much attention to that like symptom, so to say, so we sort of, we feed it, we like stroke them, we give them attention for having the symptom. So we, every time they're anxious, for example, we give them attention and we comfort them. And if we do too much of that, they get this link, and they know that they get love for having the symptom. And that's how the victim personality develops. And so like, that's the, I was sharing with you. Yeah. And I was sharing with you before that I started seeing that my daughter is doing that. And I'm very cautious about feeding her attention in those moments. And I'm finding the balance where I say, okay, honey, like, I'm sorry, you know, just sit with her, but then disengage from constant comforting her and like feeling sorry for her. Feeling sorry is like the worst what you can do in this moment, because it sends the message that they're powerless. Oh, yeah. So, and it was hard to do. And the same process with my own inner child. It's like, yeah, I see your pain, but it's like, I'm not gonna feel sorry for you. I think that was the switch for me. That's feeling sorry.
Yeah, and even, you know, I was sharing this with you earlier, but I think even sometimes when we might, it's like, so I think especially when we have the analogy of children, and I've worked extensively with children as a therapist. I think about emotional regulation being I think it's the foundation of all healthy humans. And I think it's obviously what we're really trying to give our children, and especially when they're young. It's like, how do you be with this shifting range of emotion that you have? And so, you know, I think even in the example that you gave, one, you're finding the balance that's right for your child, right? And for you, where you're able to kind of hold, you are with her for a moment, and then so that she feels met, but then you're also saying to her, like, you're able to know the nuance as a parent of like, she's genuinely really upset, or she's adding to this by the story that she's telling herself. Because I think that's a huge part of how we keep ourselves in a lot of misery, is we tell ourselves a story of how bad it is, or, you know, in her case, maybe it's, you know, like, oh, this is so terrible. But then also, I don't know what your daughter does exactly, but also, I think that even sometimes when parents bring in a form of distraction, which we look at it as distraction, right? Like, oh, they were with their child for a moment, but now they're seeing if they can go play together. I personally I used to think like, oh my God, they're not being with I mean, particularly because of my own wounding, I used to be like, they're not emotionally present with their child. But I think part of the conversation, it's actually like, what does my child need right now, so we can bring it to ourselves? What does my inner child need to stay regulated? And actually, is it to continue to be with this deep, deep pain that she's feeling? Or is it to actually go do something else? And because I work a lot with trauma, and I think a lot about, you know, the traumatized system goes into a lot of different routes of dysregulation. And some of those dysregulation could be like, I'm being with my inner child. That could be true for somebody. I can give an example actually that came to mind of a client that I've been working with. This was a session a while ago, but where it's like we were really being with her little girl and the pain that she was feeling. And I could tell at a certain point, similar to what you shared, that like she was kind of falling into it, and I was being present with it, and we were trying to bring in her adult, but the adult wasn't strong enough to be with the kind of, you can see it almost as a centrifugal force. Like it was just like going downward. And so
It's
as
strong.
as exactly, like as the person working with her, I just got it. I was like, I could feel in my own body that we were not in territory that was actually supportive to her. And so I pretty much was like, okay, I'm really with you. And I hear that, I hear how upset you are or how upset this child is. And I know that there's like this badass, strong part of you that just can come in. And what would you do right now? Like if you could bring that part of you right now, what would you say to her? And it completely transformed the entire session. Like she pretty much, then we got that part of her on board, and she felt the power of her adult. And then she even after that, like for days, she said she felt better, and she'd been feeling really, really kind of caught and down about this situation that we were working with. So
yeah, it reminds me of like intervention that I use now, and like my therapist used on me, where I was going into inner child space, and like you said, it's like a strong current, like it's very strong pull into that space, and you kind of fall into it. And then once I'm there, I'm unable to help her because I identify with her. And so what my therapist did, she said, okay, can you ask her to step back a little? And that's the technique they use in IFS, internal family systems, where they say, okay, you merged with me right now, but I cannot help you if we're merged, like if we're too much together. Can you like a little bit step back, and I'll be able to help you then better. I can continue. And it worked. She sort of like got that is helpful when she steps back, and then I can comfort her. When I'm her, we just sitting in this pain, and nothing is changing. We can sit there forever, but how do we actually heal? We're not healing by just staying there. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's a really great example, and a really great example of kind of like a good intervention and technique to unmerge with that part of you.
Right. I think that's what you did, was also along those lines. You brought in other parts that helped to make space, like a less space was taken by inner child, and because there was other parts. So sort of, I think it's the same same process, really.
Yeah. Well, and that as partly we can look at it as like our needs. What the reason that we have these wounds is because as children we weren't attuned to. And to me, attunement is actually, like when I said at the beginning I'm customized, I would just say you're a parent, right? Attunement is like, there's no one size fits all. Like there's no one thing that works. So I think, sometimes even some of these modalities that are like, this is how we work with the inner child. Like, for example, there are certain trauma modalities where I'm like, I don't think that there's enough of a sort of cutting that happened. And when I say cutting, I mean like, an adult that can come in and be fierce and containing and holding. Because I don't think holding is always, personally, I don't think holding is always like holding and being with a child, our own inner children, right? Or what we might have missed, is not always about being soft. It actually isn't just about being that. I mean, if a child is doing, like, I always like the example. It's like, if a child was beating themselves up, you wouldn't be like, oh, honey, like I would be like,
stop.
I know you're really upset right now, and it's not okay for you to talk to yourself like that. Like, I can't let you do that, to me, that's protective. And that's actually what creates safety, because the child then becomes, right? You think about that example as an adult, then the adult, if you had internalized that, then the adult would have a firm boundary and say, I'm upset, but I'm not going to beat myself up about this.
Right. I find that it's such a delicate balance for sure, very individualized, very customized, because it's easy to kind of to be either too soft or too fierce. You know, it's like you can't get out of balance, and such a with yourself too, and even like for us as professionals with our clients. Like, because I had experienced therapists that they're just like, oh, you know, and I'm like, that's not what I need right now, you know, and they're like, let me just and that doesn't work well either, you know. And I had experiences, maybe that's maybe more coaching industry where it's like, okay, it's enough crying, go do something. You're like, okay, that's not like my inner child is completely unseen right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great example. And I think what I'm talking about here is it's still an inner parenting approach, to be fierce. It's not like we're denying like, oh, go do this. You should just be able to get over it. Right. Like if I said to somebody, you know, you know, my therapist actually recently has been saying to me, he's been working with me around turning away from certain parts that are actually quite toxic to me that I have carry internally, like places where I torment myself. And you know, recently something came up where I felt like I couldn't like turn away from it. And so then of course, if I bring that to him, he's not, and he's quite skilled. He's not, it's like, we give that a moment. I'm like, I can't do it. I can't do this right now. Right. And then he meets it in the moment. And then I was able to actually then turn away from it. Right. So again, I think this is like where it's such an art. Does that make sense to you, that example?
It is. So you, by giving it like attention, so by acknowledging that you can't, you actually, it transformed, right?
Yeah, it transformed in that moment. It was like yeah, it was like we gave it that. I cried a while because I was just like, this is how I've been feeling. Like I was, whatever it was, I was feeling really depressed or some kind of real darkness, right? That I had to do with my early childhood trauma that I was touching. And it's like I was attempting on my own to turn away from it, and I couldn't do that, right? So then when I brought it to him and I just was like, oh, I can't, you know, just then emoting around it, then we were able to move forward. And I think that's a good use of being with something, right? But it could be that I then get caught in a story, or right, like then I don't know, we could get into something together where then I'm like, oh, but this is so hard and I'm so depressed and this is whatever, which would probably have contributed to what we're talking about. Like it would have been another trap. So I don't know. I mean, what I'm getting from this conversation so strongly is just like, again, that it's sort of like, so I do think, well, you know, my original post was right. Like we can get so caught in our inner child and not know that we're doing that, or we can put so much emphasis on our healing and doing the healing work that we can forget to be an adult. And I know that it's not always I mean, I said this to you before, but I don't think it's a popular opinion. Like a lot of people really believe in, a lot of practitioners believe in like continuing to doing the kind of inner parent, inner child, inner parent work. And I'm not saying that I would ever advise people to not have that as part of what they're doing with themselves or even like as a provider. But I do take the view from my own experience that sometimes even from an adult place, meeting my inner child, I've done what I can. And it's actually just about saying, okay, I've tried to heal this, or I've healed it as much as she's willing to be healed right now. And like I said before, I might just have to accept that I have this part of me, and that this part of me may never go away. Like I believe this to be true of my clients and of myself. And I don't know what your experience is of, but there are certain things from my childhood. It was really, really, I had a very traumatic childhood, like for a lot of early relational trauma. there are certain things that I might always see or have to touch upon. And I think that being able, like you use the great language of like disidentifying, being able to say, oh, this is coming up again. You know what? I'm not actually gonna, this is where I think another trap is. I'm not gonna try to do more healing work in order to make her feel better. I'm actually just gonna notice it and say, okay, I see you. I see that you're there. I'm still really wounded. And that's okay. And I love you and I'm okay with that. And I'm going to keep living my adult life. Yeah.
I totally agree with you. And that's what I tell my clients too, that the goal of like therapy, the goal of our healing work is not to get rid of your depression or your anxiety. It's change your relationship with it. So it's not, so it doesn't prevent you from still living your true life. So it's like, I use the word tolerating. I talked to some colleagues, they didn't like it. It's not that I'm like embracing it and tolerating. It's more that I'm with it. I'm able to be with it without it being overwhelming. So even though I'm anxious or depressed, I'm still working on my project. Or not anxious and depressed. I don't like, because it's identification language. Maybe some anxiety or some sadness is still there, and I can say, okay, you hear, it's exactly what you were saying, and I'm completely total agreement and resonance with it, and I can acknowledge that it's there and still go do my project as an adult self. So sort of hold my little girl in my lap while I do them. So she's there, but she's not like taking over the the driver's seat, so to say.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. I love that. I'm when you said what was the word that you used? Sorry, of tolerating. Many years ago, a therapist said to me, and it stuck with me, so obviously it was meaningful. She said something about surviving. Like it's like, and I actually in this context really like this word. It's like, this is coming up and I'm surviving it. Like I wouldn't want to do my childhood again, obviously. And there is something about being able, tolerate is another word for it. It's about being able to open big enough and say, okay, I'm, this hurts and I'm surviving it. And, and I'm tolerating it and I'm finding ways to be creative with it. I think that's the part that sometimes a lot of inner child work kind of can also, miss is like the purpose of doing it is so we're more free, right? And I think I've really been getting this lately, especially because of the person I'm working with, but like he plays a lot with me. Like he's very creative. So there's not even like the healing work is not like we're doing this really serious thing. It's like he can, and I need play. That's part of my healing, but there's like, even like, he'll role play things and all role play, like we'll role play together certain parts and we'll like make light of them and make fun of them. And so again, it reminds me of, being able to survive something that was maybe challenging and to bring levity and to bring laughter to it. And I've actually been experiencing a lot more relief than I have than I have in the past, doing a lot of like very serious inner child work.
Yeah.
So I think it's also about helping our clients find creative and playful ways to be with these parts that are challenging. And I think that does take, it takes an adult, it takes, or it could take a child, a child that's like, I don't go through this. I'm gonna make light of this,
Right. I was studying some transactional analysis lately. I've been really into that modality. It's not that popular, but they have this idea that really resonates, that we have a free child and we have the wounded child, and they actually separate children. So a lot of work of the therapy is connecting to the free child, and a lot of wounded child is sort of like on top or around, and you trying to get to the free either child, and sometimes you need to like move aside the wounded child to get to the free spirited child, because free spirited child is like just wants to play and wants to be free, and joy is the sign that you got to it, is how joyful.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's been on my mind as well. And in my own personal work, I've been working with that kind of who's the child that actually never got to be, right? Like what would that child, the one that was actually had to use too much strategy and, had to like, and this is my personal story and why I work with women who've been in the personal growth therapy space for a long time and who still feel like they're kind of stuck, is because this is kind of interesting. I think other people might relate to this. Like, um, me doing healing work is actually the strategy that my wounded child used in order to cope. So
Oh,
so it's a very kind of tricky thing. It's like, I'll just keep healing, um, and like I'll keep working hard and then finally I'll have what I need, or finally I'll be loved, or finally I'll be at peace, right? And I did a lot of, my childhood was like me doing a lot of internal work to make sure that the family was okay, right? So I was kind of in that healer role. And so that's been such a core identity. So in my case, that's partly why there's like a kind of unmerging even with that and saying like, well, what if you never even healed ever again? Like, what if this is it? Right. And I would actually invite that question for almost everybody who's been in a healing space for a long time. Like, I think it's an important developmental step when we're doing for people who are new. Sure. Yes. It's important to do healing, a lot of healing, it's important to do this healing work. But I think at a certain point, there's something about saying, what if this is like, what if my life will always be like this? Like, what if this is like the happiest it's going to get, the most peaceful it's going to get, I'm always going to have these parts inside. This is it.
Yeah. What if? I think it's definitely like, to me, I don't like, I do things. I'm just trying to see how I do my healing work now. It's not like it used to be like, oh, I really wanted to change something or to like get rid of something. It's not anymore, because I know that like the more you're trying to get rid of something, the more it's just gonna stay and stick and try to hold on to it. So I think it's more of like, yeah, accepting it, building tolerance to it, but not, in a way that like, building my strength to sort of be with most difficult inner experiences and still show up in a way I want to show up in the world, and still sort of, yeah, so have both, like have the wounded, the shadow, but also have like the power, the joy, and have this balance. And a lot of time in therapy we do spend too much time onto this woundedness, and we feed it and feed it and feed it without attention. And so how do we make it, I was actually thinking about it, like, oh, maybe a therapy is sort of twisted in that way, like with the pathologizing, the traditional psychotherapeutic approach. And maybe that's why coaching is so popular, because it sort of like promises all the joy and right, and without that, and maybe it is unbalanced, maybe it is too much like of this, like, oh, like, yeah, let's heal you, like maybe it's because it's selling something, right? That's coaching becoming this big thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I it's interesting because I think, I think it's fair to say this, that I think both of us I completely agree with what you just said. And I think one of my interests in entering into the coaching field is to meld the two. Because I think the deeper trauma and, inner child work, or the deeper kind of therapy work, is something that's lacking in this industry. And so then there's an assumption that people can just, oh, you want A, B, or C, you can just do, 1, 2, or 3 and get there, which denies the fact that we have wounds that are living in our bodies and our nervous systems, and right, that we're kind of like, we need to actually sort of sort through. And that actually can, but it's like exactly what this conversation is. How do we bring them together, which is what we started with, right? Like your beautiful examples of like, how do I the point of doing the inner child healing. Yes, it is to connect with self and to have a relationship with self, which is obviously extremely important, and to a relationship with our feelings and our inner world, and being able to learn how to regulate our emotional world, which all will impact our adult lives. And I would say the purpose of it is like so that we can live our lives now, like we do, so that we don't have to keep reliving the childhood experience that we had, especially if it was painful and, you know, was not a positive experience. It's like so that we actually can live as we are now, you know, exactly what we started with, that we can separate out the past from the present. Mhm. So.
And have more joy. I was just thinking about that like I would like to measure progress in terms of not in terms of less pathology, but more joy. Like how much of my clients more joy they're having, and if they're having increasingly more joy, that means, you know, therapy is working. Yeah. I mean, probably like insurance companies wouldn't agree, or like the you know, it's like too much of this like pathologizing or diagnosing, but I think it's a cool measure.
Yeah.
Focusing on increasing those qualities versus like even focusing on decreasing, because if we put the attention into the pathology, the symptoms, we're just going to feed it with attention, so we can put our attention into other sides and grow that. It's like, you know, that wolf story, which one are you going to feed? The wolves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all have two wolves, the dark and the light one, and which one are we feeding with our attention, basically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I think is it's very true, especially for people who've been doing a lot of like internal work and sort of in the self healing world. And I think there are also people who need to focus, you know, obviously we're not speaking to that today, but who also actually need to be able to develop more of a capacity to be with pain or to be with challenges. But obviously that's all in service of being more of an adult who can actually experience more ongoing joy, right? Like, or peace or well-being.
Right, because I think if we don't make contact with, actually, like most of my clients are on their way to making contact with the inner child. So I sort of like this, we're talking about this, I feel like it's more maybe for more experienced, like people who've been in this healing profession or as a clients like 10 plus years. And that's what maybe resonates more for newer people. They can, you know, maybe we don't want to like them to twist the message and say like, oh, see, you can get an inner child healing, so I don't want to do this, like, well, let's not get there. But the thing is, if the wounded inner child is there, so unconsciously, if we don't make contact with him and bring the light of the consciousness there, they're gonna still sabotage us. Like unconsciously, we won't be able to be joyful because it's still there, we're just not looking at it. So it's really, I love how you said like it's really an art, and everybody's different, everybody has different tendencies. We because we talked like we Enneagram 4s, and we like to dark and deep feelings, and there's Enneagram 7, and they don't want to.
4s need to be particularly careful of this trap because they really love dark and deep emotions, and they just want to go there. And the 4 is actually in a trance, like the inner child, going into the inner child kind of endlessly is a bit of a 4 trance. So anyway.
So if you're an Enneagram, if you know about Enneagram, and if you type 4, then you're gonna find this helpful, I think, because we get stuck there pretty easily. But then there's like type 7, and they don't want to even touch on it, you know, and they just want to bypass it. So it's definitely like I think the summary of this conversation can say, how do we make contact with inner child, but not like get sucked into it or stuck or overly identify it with it.
And one, if I can add something that just came back again, is that okay?
Are we? Yeah, sure. We have time. Yeah.
You know, I think it's true that when you're first starting out on your healing path, and it sounds like this is who you work with, I think, you know, there's so many modalities like IFS, like you named, internal family systems, and I don't know the kinds of modality, but there's AEDP, which is accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy. There's just what we learn as therapists, I think, which is to obviously begin to separate the inner child and the adult. So I think, you start to work with people and then sometimes you find, okay, this person's working well, but now I need something else. And then you go to someone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think as we go farther along the path, and I think it's great for even people, even when you're first starting with inner child work, I just want to come back to this idea of, I think the most effective work is always going to be where the therapist or the provider or the coach is really able to attune to your specific needs. And I think therapists get that kind of training way more than coaches do. But
also with experience, they kind of learn that like, okay,
yeah,
they keep using.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you have, and you get supervised. And so you have a lot of people kind of supporting you with that. But I think one thing I would say about the inner child trap, which I said earlier, but I just want to stress, and especially as you I think as people move along in their healing process, is that it's so important to treat oneself or have the provider be with you in a way where you're really attuning to your specific child internally. And I think that's where we can really stop getting into a trap. I think that if we relate to our children the same way all the time, and that's what I was saying earlier, like your example of your daughter is just such a good example because she's your daughter, right? And I worked with parents and kids for years. And so I would see this, right? Part of what we were doing, part of what I was doing with parents is tweaking. Okay, so this is how you respond to her. And that has to do with, right, like usually it had to do with their own childhoods and the things that were, right, the places in them, their own psychodynamics and the places in them where that's comfortable, that's not comfortable. And so we then would kind of support, sometimes go into the parents' childhood to to sort of be able to kind of help them to see where they might be blocked in certain areas around meeting their child. But what I was going to say is that I think it's easier to look at when you're a parent to an actual child, right? Like in your case, maybe it wasn't always, maybe you're very empathic. I don't know. And maybe it wasn't comfortable for you at first to be like, oh, I'm just going to ignore her, right?
Oh, yeah, no, it was painful because my own inner child was so wounded that she didn't get any attention or any, I mean, I don't want to say any, but she didn't have enough attention. So what she wanted at first is like attention. Like she wanted to be like, I needed to be with her for hours sometimes in the beginning. Like I said, like just give her a lot of attention, and any kind of fierceness. I mean, like we don't want to, again, fierceness can be very loving, right? And but internally sometimes, because I don't have the experience of loving fierceness, I couldn't give it to myself, and the way I would give to myself fierceness, it wasn't true fierceness. It was more like, okay, stop it, stop crying. Like, I can't like deal with your pain anymore, go away. And it was rejecting. And so when I started dealing with my daughter, I was so afraid of rejecting her, then I couldn't be fierce. I was like, I'm just gonna hold it for as long as you need to, and all my plans can go to hell, I don't care, I'm just gonna be with you. But it wasn't sustainable because I also needed to take care of myself. I needed to learn how to be with her pain in a way that's not rejecting, but not like feeling sorry, not feeding the victim, not giving attention to the woundedness, but give attention to that part of her that's whole, that's strong, so sort of like saying, okay, I see your pain is welcome here, and I'm gonna go do something, and you're gonna be okay. I know you're gonna be okay because you're a strong girl. I see that you got this, internally with my stance. It's super hard to do because it feels at first like you're abandoning her because that's what was your experience.
So it's that example is just so exquisite for what I was talking about, because it just speaks it speaks to so many angles of this, right? It's like, it's the reason that we struggle to be with our inner children, because we didn't get the parenting that we needed in the first place, right? And so in order for you, like you're talking about your daughter, right? But in order for any of us to be able to be attuned to our inner world and be able to feel like, to know kind of, to try different things, to know how to show up in different moments, and if we try and it doesn't work, to try something else, right? I think that that's actually what, I mean, one, I think that's what we want to get from a provider, that they actually have that kind of expertise to be able to, very in a nuanced way meet us, so that we start to internalize it, and then we can be with ourselves that way. But that also, that we can, like ultimately we can be with ourselves in the way that you had to adjust to your daughter, and that it's not a one size fits all, and that it's not going to, necessarily even resolve overnight. I mean, like, I worked with parents who, it's like, they'd be like, well, that didn't work. It's like, okay, but we actually needed to keep trying that, right? Like, your child needs to get used to that. Like, okay, we need to do it in steps. Like, there's just so many different, so I'm just speaking to the nuance of, I think, this is where like inner child gets really thrown around, or like, oh, do the inner child work. It's like, it's not as simple as just, this is another one of the traps, right? And I know we're probably getting towards the end, but it's like, it's not as simple as just being with your inner world, because, there's so many ways in which you have to kind of meet oneself. And that is a process that takes time. And we have to even get over, I mean, I see it. This is why I said the fierce parenting approach. I mean, I think sometimes we really do need containment, but we have to be willing to look at our own bullshit, to be honest, right? We have to be like, yep, I think that I'm like, oh, I'm being with my child. Oh, I'm totally indulging my child right now, actually. And I'm letting her, I mean, I still struggle with this, it's like I get into a negative space and I see myself playing out stories, when actually the story is feeding the experience that I'm having. I'm not being with my inner child. I'm feeding a story. So I think that's like another trap, is that, and people, this is partly why I wrote that in the first place. Sometimes I feel, and this might also not be popular, but people use it as an excuse. Like, oh, but, there's sort of an excuse for, it's an excuse for themselves. Like, oh, I'm feeling really bad, or, they're falling, like you said, like they're falling into a victim, or, people have views of, oh, this other person, this exchange happened because, or like this person was saying this about me, or they were, like we project it out onto another person, thinking that they're causing us a certain kind of harm that they're actually not, that actually isn't, maybe there's something there, but we're triggered by it, we're not. And so then we see it as that. And I also see people doing that,
Yeah, I see people like sometimes get angry, and they would say, well, my inner child got triggered, like, or I was pain, and that's why I got angry, and sort of like using it as an excuse. Yeah. But not like your like adult self is still like responsible, we want to hold the adult self responsible. And also with like, I find it personally with like projects, or like I wanted to do things like this for a while, right? And for months I was like terrified, because oh my God, my inner child won't survive this, like go on live on Facebook. My inner child, like she can't even like, no. And for months I'll be like, well, I'm not ready. She's not ready, but she'll never be ready. She doesn't need to be here.
That's a good example of what I said before.
Right.
So at a certain point, you say, yep, I hear that you're scared, and you know what, we're going to do this anyway. And that was my earlier point.
And I'll say like, okay, go play, honey. You don't need to be here. She doesn't need to be here. She can go do her child things.
Yeah.
In my inner experience. And it's just, I put her away. I think that's a good skill to have, the ability to be in contact and put her away when it's not a child thing to do.
That's beautiful. I really love that. It sounds like you have such a I mean, I'm sure you work with clients in this way too, but you have such a nuance with your own inner child, and just like you've learned so well that you're kind of able to see some of your own loopholes. Because I think part of this conversation, you know, if we could, what we could leave people with is like, investigate your own wounding enough. Like, look at the places where you might get stuck, because each person gets stuck in different places.
Yeah.
You know, we each have our own traps that we get caught in, right? Like,
Right.
Four, like we said, the 4, it's going to be like, but this is real and I'm feeling this and it's so important. You know,
I need to feel this. Yeah, I need to have space. Yeah, but and you know, it's again, it's crucial to have. Oh, sorry, you have.
we're
to.
Mind if I'll take 2 more minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So you have to go. No worries. I was just gonna maybe end this, that also I was able to get to this place because I got feedback of a practitioner. I was stuck in inner child healing space for a long time in the first stage of healing, and one session I was with my therapist, and she said, "Look, like you actually in a trauma state right now," and I didn't even realize it. I thought I'm actually healing, but and she said, "We'll see if you can get out. Can you get on the other side?" And I didn't know what it was. I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm here. I need to be here. It feels right." And she said, "No, actually, you're not healing right now." And that's why having somebody to look at your process is important too.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I think, you know, I think that's what I would also say, is that there's the like garden variety of being with our inner children, and any, like, you can learn that in different ways, and people talk about it offhand, but I'll just stress what I always stress, which is that I think this work is really important. It's important to do it with someone else who actually can kind of see you clearly, and, you know, help you see the places in yourself that you actually just aren't aware of, because it is such a nuanced, it's a very nuanced, you know, like I keep saying, like, it's different for everyone, and because we all have our own kinds of wounding, and we're all going to get caught in our own different, you know, versions of traps.
Yeah, different kinds of wounding, different personalities, different tendency. Well, definitely unique. So definitely reach out to me or Lori if you want to work. Right?
Yeah.
I'll drop your website, Lori, so people can reach out.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for having me. And I also I would invite people, if they have questions about this or different experiences. I think both you and I are, I mean, I hope that's okay to say, but I think both you and I are really interested in this topic, and I'm interested in different people's experiences.
Yeah, they can even comment on this video, and we can keep the conversation going and respond to it.
Yeah.
It was great. Pleasure to talk to you. So really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really fun. I enjoyed it too. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye.